Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today, we dive into a headline that created shockwaves across the political and media landscape. A headline that instantly grabbed global attention: BBC apologizes to Donald Trump but refuses to pay. Now, whenever the name Donald Trump appears in the news, people expect drama, controversy, and heated debate. And when the BBC, one of the world's largest, oldest, and most respected public broadcasters, gets involved, well, let's just say the story becomes bigger than anyone expects. But what exactly happened? Why was an apology issued? Why was payment demanded in the first place? And perhaps the biggest question, why did the BBC refuse? In today's video, we'll unpack every detail, not just the headline, but the deeper context. We'll explore how political messaging, media narratives, legal complexities, and public perception all collide in this story. We'll revisit the events leading to the apology, examine the BBC's stance, evaluate Trump's reaction, and analyze how the public and global media responded. This is not just a story about one apology. It's a story about power, media power, political power, and public influence. So sit tight as we explore exactly how this unexpected confrontation unfolded, what each side wanted, and what this means for journalism in the modern era. Let's begin. To understand the situation, we need to go back to the beginning. It all started when a BBC program aired a segment involving statements, clips, and commentary related to former US President Donald Trump. The segment discussed his political rallies, media appearances, and some of the claims he made during interviews. While most broadcasters cover Trump regularly, this particular segment stood out for one key reason. The way the BBC framed the commentary was seen by Trump's team as misleading. According to sources close to the story, Trump's legal advisors argued that part of the segment used his statements out of context. They claimed the program included an edited clip that altered the tone of his original message, presenting it in a way that could be interpreted negatively. This is where things escalated. Trump's team reached out to the BBC, insisting that the broadcaster issue a correction, an apology, and most importantly, financial compensation for what they described as reputational damage. Now, anyone familiar with political media knows that disputes between politicians and broadcasters are not new. Trump himself has had extended battles with CNN, MSNBC, and multiple newspapers. But the BBC, being a publicly funded institution governed by charter, usually maintains strict editorial standards and avoids public clashes. So when Trump's team formally demanded compensation, the situation quickly became international news. Behind closed doors, meetings were held at BBC headquarters in London. Editors, producers, legal advisors, and risk management teams combed through the segment frame by frame. They evaluated whether the editing was fair, whether the commentary followed guidelines, and whether the broadcast unintentionally misrepresented Trump. Ultimately, the BBC reached a conclusion, one that would form the foundation of everything that followed. After internal review, the BBC decided to release an official apology. But here's the important detail. The apology was not an admission of wrongdoing in the legal sense. Instead, it was a courtesy apology, a public acknowledgement that the segment could have been clearer and may unintentionally have caused misunderstanding among viewers. This type of apology is common in media organizations. It maintains professionalism without admitting legal liability. The wording was carefully crafted, precise, and strategic, a technique large media institutions use to prevent lawsuits while preserving credibility. The statement emphasized, no intentional misrepresentation occurred. Editorial standards were followed based on available information. The BBC regretted any confusion or unintended interpretation. Steps would be taken to ensure greater clarity in future broadcasts. The apology satisfied many viewers, reduced tension, and showed the BBC's willingness to maintain fairness. But to Trump's legal team, it wasn't enough. They argued that the apology failed to address the actual harm they believed the segment caused. According to them, only financial compensation could acknowledge the impact properly. Trump publicly commented on the situation, saying he appreciated the apology but still expected the BBC to do the right thing. However, the BBC had already made its decision. While they were willing to apologize, they were not willing to compensate financially. And this rejection, unsurprisingly, sparked a much bigger controversy. To understand why the BBC refused to pay, we must explore how media compensation works. In the world of journalism, organizations only pay compensation when one of the following is true. 1. A factual error caused measurable damage. 2. A statement was proven defamatory. 3. The broadcaster intentionally misled the audience. 4. The editorial team violated internal or legal standards. In this case, the BBC argued that none of these conditions were met. Their reasoning included: the segment was based on publicly available information. The program used real footage, real speeches, and real public statements. Nothing was fabricated. Commentary is legally protected. Under UK law, broadcasters are allowed to provide balanced commentary and analysis, even if it is critical. Editorial independence is part of the BBC Charter. If the BBC pays every public figure who claims reputational damage, it would set a dangerous precedent, weakening journalistic freedom. No tangible damage was proven. For a legal claim to succeed, the complainant must demonstrate specific, measurable harm. Trump's team argued theoretical damage, not quantifiable loss. Payment would imply wrongdoing. Even if the amount was small, paying would publicly signal that the BBC had acted improperly. They refused to send that message. In internal discussions, one argument came up repeatedly: if we start paying politicians, we will no longer be independent journalists. This principle is central to the BBC's identity. As a publicly funded institution, they must avoid anything that compromises neutrality. So while they apologized to maintain goodwill and professionalism, they held firm on their refusal to pay. It was a business decision, a legal decision, and most importantly, a journalistic decision. But the refusal triggered a wave of public debate from both sides. Donald Trump is not someone who stays silent in the face of conflict. After the apology was published, Trump initially welcomed it. But once he learned there would be no financial compensation, his tone shifted. He posted publicly criticizing the BBC, calling the refusal unfair, unprofessional, and a typical example of media bias. His supporters amplified the message. Several commentators argued that the BBC's apology indirectly admitted fault, and therefore compensation was justified. Others claimed global media outlets treat Trump uniquely harshly. Trump himself framed the situation as part of a broader struggle between him and what he often refers to as the media establishment. By positioning himself as a target of unfair coverage, he rallied his base and reignited debates about media credibility. Behind the scenes, legal advisors considered whether further action was necessary. Ultimately, they seemed to conclude that pursuing an international lawsuit would be costly, time-consuming, and unlikely to succeed, especially in the UK, where defamation laws and media protections are complex. So Trump continued to voice his dissatisfaction publicly, but the conflict did not escalate into legal war. Instead, it turned into something more powerful: a public relations battle. So what do we make of the headline, "BBC apologizes to Trump but refuses to pay"? It represents a modern media paradox. An apology shows accountability. A refusal to pay shows independence. Public backlash shows division. Political reaction shows power dynamics. The BBC handled the situation with calculated strategy, enough humility to maintain credibility, but enough firmness to protect journalistic freedom. Trump handled it the way he handles most media disputes: loudly, confidently, and with an eye toward public opinion. The world watched, debated, argued, and moved on. But the lessons remain. This story reminds us that the relationship between media and political figures is delicate, complex, and constantly evolving. It shows that in a world overloaded with information, even a single edited clip can spark an international debate. And it proves that despite criticism, mistrust, and polarization, the role of independent journalism is more important than ever. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. Whether you agree with the BBC, side with Trump, or fall somewhere in the middle, one thing is clear: the tension between media and politics isn't going anywhere. Each story teaches us something new about truth, perception, and the evolving landscape of modern journalism. If you found this breakdown informative, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And let me know in the comments. Do you think the BBC did the right thing? Was the apology enough? Should compensation have been paid? I'd love to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.